And we're back.
All right. We're back. Take 2. So
Yeah.
every week I feel like we talk about how this chapter was just so good. And I
I
think that's kind
know.
of just the
They're
theme
all so
of the
good.
book. That every single chapter it's like, yep, we as education, as the industry, needs this chapter. Thank you, Eric.
Right.
So
Thank you, Mr.
this
Chalice.
thank you. This week I feel like we need to hype up Eric DeShaw a bit more too. I feel like we had a big hype going for Alfie Kohn in season
Oh,
1.
we did.
Like
We were
people who
totally
listen
fangirls.
definitely, like they definitely saw the fangirl nature. I feel like we have to bring that same kind of energy to Eric DeShaw.
You know, this is why, like, I had more energy for Alfie. I think because I watched so many of his trainings where I
Yeah, that's
haven't watched
true.
any. I don't even know what Eric Chalice looks like.
Okay,
I'm
so
very
after
visual.
we end this podcast, we are going to go do a deep dive for Eric DeShaw on Manchester.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, you do it too,
Let's
listeners.
fangirl.
Let's all become Eric DeShaw fangirls.
I think that I'm pretty sure that he teaches at Harvard. We could go
He's
to his
not far
house.
away from me then.
I know. Just
All right, well, we have some weekend plans. We did not know we were going to do on Sunday, but now we know.
yeah.
Okay,
Ah!
anyways, let's get into the chapter. Chapter 7, That's Not Fair, Why Indignation is Better Than Resignation. And I got to stretch because I'm doing the summary first this week. Hit me with that timer, Brittany. Let's do this.
Okay, hold on. Let's see here. 2 minutes on the clock.
Okay.
Oh, wait. I started it too early. Okay, ready?
Here we go. So in chapter 7, That's Not Fair, Why Indignation is Better Than Resignation. Basically, the entire chapter proves why it's better for you to have a student who is kind of calling you out, being more vocal, being angry, than one that's just withdrawing into the folds of the class and going unnoticed or just shy and keeping to themselves. Because when you have that anger, you still have connection. But when you have that withdrawal, you lose that connection. That's what we need for education to really happen. I think that was a good summary in of itself. But let's dive in even further throughout the chapter. So we start off by looking at why we should expect indignation to happen. Like we're in a role where we are telling kids what to do, and people don't like that. So like it's natural for conflict to arise, and when conflict arises, it's not a bad thing. It just means that you have different people who are working to build something together, and that's natural. So we shouldn't fear conflict. We should embrace it. And we also should look at the purpose behind what we are teaching and what we are doing and make sure everything that we give kids that's student facing is purposeful. And just because our day might feel purposeful for us, like teaching kids, they might not get that same purpose out of the academic content we're giving them. So we want to be able to have it so that they can create their own purpose in what we are doing, and that'll make them more inclined to want to work with us. And then it ends up talking too about why kids end up venturing into idealism, having a strong sense of fairness, and at the end of the chapter, it ends with how we can handle anger in our students and how we can handle shyness in our students, and some great action steps for educators and schools in navigating that.
Boom.
I think that was a pretty good summary.
That was good.
All right. You ready?
Okay. Woo! Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
On your mark. Get set. Summarize.
Okay, that's not fair. Why indignation is better than resignation. So he really goes into conflict, specifically how conflict strengthens, deepens relationships. Like if we think about the relationships that we have with some of our closest friends, our family, it's not without those relationships do not exist without conflict. The ability to work through conflict makes fortifies that relationship and really gives a mutual respect. He talks about how ignoring or ridiculing or repressing like emotional forms of resistance can actually lead to resignation and to withdrawal. And that's not what we want. We want the kids talking. Um, if you've ever read How to Speak So Kids Will Listen, and How to Listen So Kids Will Talk, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, and How to Listen So Kids Will Talk. Did I just?
We'll link it in
Okay.
the show notes.
Yeah, I'll link it in the show notes. Okay, so if you ever read that book, one of the best quotes from that book is, "If you've got a kid talking, then it is not too late. It is too late when that kid shuts down and refuses to talk." So we want to keep our kids talking. We want to keep them questioning. We want to keep them engaged. If they are meeting us with a level of indignation, defiance, then they're thinking about the content, they're thinking about the situation, they are engaged, and we want to engage that resistance, which is pretty much the whole book, right? So that's why indignation is better than resignation.
All right. Nice. I like our additions too for other resources that you can look at in the
Yeah.
summary. When you were saying that, I thought for sure you were going to say, if you watch How I Met Your Mother, because it started off with like how I.
Oh yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty good book. I feel like it's more geared to parents. I mean,
Mhm.
he does no, they no, it is geared to teachers. It's been a long time since I read it. It's pretty old.
Maybe that can be a book club series
I don't want
sometime.
to diss the author. It's just I was like about it.
Oh, so
I'm
it will
like
not be.
fangirl about yeah, Alfie and Eric.
Anyways.
Fangirl. Yeah.
So in this chapter, what are some things that really stood out to you, Britt?
Um so right now I'm like neck deep in regulation. Um because the workshop series. So it's really about like embracing conflict, and that comes with um not being triggered by it. And so when we shift when we shift how we see conflict from less of like threat to more of an opportunity to strengthen relationships and engage our students in the experience of learning and in the content, when we shift our perspective to see it from threat to opportunity, that really stood, like how he presented that really stood out to me. um
Yeah, I love that.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
also aligns with the book Crucial Conversations, which is one of the ones I recommend to
Oh, yeah.
educators all the time. That's a really good book, Crucial Conversations. There's
And
another
admin.
title for it's like Start with Heart, Crucial Conversations. Well worth it.
Mhm. Yeah. I feel like that's like a fundamental admin book. It's always
Yeah.
suggested, like in the ed leadership courses, you know?
Hmm.
Um, so he says on page 150, what if conflict like resistance were understood as a resource for students and educators in a learning community? And that we should expect conflict in all human relationships, that it is the norm and not a disruption. And holler, because that's absolutely a fantastic way to think about conflict, because when you think about
Yeah.
it like that as a resource, it's not as triggering. You're like,
Yeah.
"Hey, okay,
It
let's do
feels
it."
better. Like even just like you saying
Mhm.
them, like, oh yeah, it feels better.
Yeah,
Um,
because it's shifting our mindset from, like, loss of control to
mhm.
control and confidence, you know?
Yeah. And that's the big shift, I think, when you start viewing behavior and education the way that we talk about and support educators in. I tell people, like I post about it too, it's like you go from playing checkers to playing chess. Like you're playing
Mm.
an entirely different game when you start viewing
Ah.
behavior differently. and you start
Mhm.
looking at conflict, for example, not as something you have to suppress, but as like a tool for navigation.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, and even in this chapter too, it talked about how we need to not be in the last week too, or last chapter, how we need to be looking at behavior and not looking at that as the problem, but looking at that
Mhm.
behavior as a symptom and knowing that, okay,
Yeah.
we are like the doctor. We have to figure out what's going on
Mhm.
here.
Yeah. I always say detective. Like, you gotta
Yeah.
look at behavior like a detective. You can't detectives are not emotionally involved. If they are, they're taken off the case, right?
Mhm.
Because emotions are gonna cloud your judgment, your
Yeah.
detail orientation, like, so you
Exactly.
really
Even at
have
the
to.
end,
Oh,
I cut you off, but even at the end of the chapter, when it was talking about navigating anger, and when you pull the kid
mm,
aside into the hall, we have a conversation. Like if a kid's
mhm,
swearing at you or they're saying all this stuff, not taking it personally, not even addressing that right away, which I think is something that's it's a bit rare to see. And even like
yeah.
I think by the teachers I work with, where if they do that, their colleagues might be like, "Oh, well, you're letting that kid walk all over you." I'm like, "No,
Oh,
this is actually how you navigate the behavior." But I
how you
also feel like that's a
teach.
societal thing. We have to navigate that. Just because a kid might act, in the put quotes, disrespectfully, and you don't address it in the moment, doesn't mean that you're not advancing the kid and teaching them those skills. Or even that
Right.
you're okay with how they spoke, but it's that there's another issue going on that you have to address.
Mhm.
It's like if you are in the ER and you see like a patient coming in who's like been in an accident, you're not gonna be like, oh,
Mhm.
let me fix your lipstick. You're going to like take care
Yeah,
of what actually needs to be addressed first.
right, and that's the root of the problem, the root of the
Yeah,
behavior. Yep, you're
exactly.
absolutely right. You have a really good saying, your your message is getting lost in your delivery.
Oh yeah, your message is lost in your delivery.
Mhm. I
And
mean, I
that's the
wouldn't say
one
that.
you
Oh,
wouldn't say that?
I wouldn't say that to a kid if they're swearing, like screaming and swearing.
No, no.
Yeah, but if the kid is like escalating, they're not
Mhm.
escalated. If they're escalating, uh, I would say I would have said something like that, like,
And I think
um,
after the fact too, like when you're having that
yeah,
debrief, I think that's a good
mhm,
time for it. The only thing that I would push back on a little bit in this chapter is
mm,
navigating the anger and going back into the room. I'm all for like don't force an apology, but there
mhm,
was a discrepancy
mm,
about how after co-developing a solution with the student, if you still have the student's attention and the student still has the energy, then and only then, if at all, should you discuss the language he or she may have used in class.
mm,
And that's one where I'm like, I kind of want to push back on that a bit because I think that language is what leads to having like a safe climate. And I also
mm,
think that we have to teach kids how to read the room and how to navigate situations. And if a kid like tells me to go F myself, I'm not going to take that personally. But I also don't want
mm,
that kid to be in a situation where it's higher stakes and they resort to that, you know?
mm. Yeah,
So I'm not saying like we punish or we penalize, but I am saying that I do think that that is something we should address when the kid's ready, just be in the moment.
right. That's what I would say. Like, you're
Yeah.
in the if you have an elevated student, I'm gonna completely take out student and just say brain. If you have an elevated
Oh
brain,
yeah.
if you have a triggered brain, um, any type of teaching isn't going to happen. They're not going to be receptive because they're in fight or flight. So you have to get that executive functioning back online if you're going to have a brain be receptive and actually process what you're saying
Yeah.
and, like, be able to consider future.
And at the end of the chapter too, just people who haven't read the chapter yet, like you go through all of these steps as well, including like looking at a kid through an asset-based lens. Like you go through a whole list of steps before you
Mhm,
even go about addressing. what happened. And that's also why I teach inside my course. Let's not do that again. Like, you can't, like Brittany said, you can't enter the executive state if you're not
Mhm.
able to enter the executive state.
Yeah, yeah. Like if so, I had a post yesterday that was very contentious, about a student who stomped on their laptop and, and stuck their middle finger in my face and said, you know, "F you." And I didn't address the language. I didn't like really address the behavior in that moment because I had an incredibly escalated student. And if you know anything about me and my background, I worked in a behavioral program. So that behavior wasn't um, anything abnormal. That was pretty mild. Um, so I wasn't escalated at all. Also, I had a really good relationship with the kid.
And that makes a
Um,
big difference too when you're addressing things. You're not escalated, so you're able to
yeah.
use your own executive functioning skills.
Yes. Yes, that it has to you have to be regulated yourself. A dysregulated adult cannot help a dysregulated child. So, with that situation, a uh, a person commented, they're a domestic violence advocate about the safety, the feelings of safety for the other students, and that's always a concern. And especially with students, um, well, hold on, I'm going to stay on this path because I was venturing off to like making sure that these kids don't go out into the world and like stomp on things and stick their middle finger up at like in a cop's face or something. I want to stick with the concern for the other students in the room and then hit that. So, for the concern of the other students in the room, um, we s- we had a really good conversation in the comments section. And if you haven't seen that post, I definitely suggest that you read those comments because
And we'll link
I
it
was
too
on
in the show notes.
okay. Yeah. I was on there like all night talking to people. And a lot of psychologists, school psychologists, and advocates hopped in and provided their strategies and their opinions, and it the comment section is fantastic. But so um, and- oh so what was it? Okay, so the comment section.
You were
So the
going,
comment
you
section.
wanted to go down this route, and then you wanted to
Yeah,
talk about like if it's happening like in a police officer space. You
yeah.
mentioned that.
Okay, so with the students, um, being like the concern of the other students, um, I suggest that you provide a way for those students to exit the environment if removing the student that's escalated and being violent isn't an option. Allow the kids that are really uncomfortable to step out. Like, it's not fair for them to be, to feel threatened and have to sit in that space. That's not fair. So I always told my kids, like, if we're in a situation like that, step out to the hallway, go to the library. Like, I trust you guys. I was in a very small school, but like, you can step out, you can do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And that comes down to like having those conversations, discussions with your kids, making sure that like they trust you and you trust them. Um and also making sure that those kids have a voice. So it's not just the kid that's getting violent and flipping out that is heard. Like, you're providing your other students with opportunities to speak up. And we did that through student like group discussions a lot. I had a discussion a day. Like, it was the culture of my room.
And
So
that's the nature of
then,
teaching. Like that's what you have to do.
oh yeah, yeah. But about the police officer space. So this is where it gets, because like especially with kids with autism, right? Like you think that a police officer is going to be trained in de-escalation techniques, but they're not. That's the reality of the situation. And a lot of the times, we're putting, or we can, um, by by putting these kids in a situation where like you're, and some people will say enabling the behavior, but I consider it to be like a therapeutic technique, like therapeutically handling the behavior. They'll say like, oh, if this person were to go out in the real world and they stick their middle finger up in a cop's face, they're going to get arrested and dot 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 dot. That's like, that is so far down the road. Like, as an adult, if they did that, that is going to get them arrested. As a kid with a disability, that should not get them arrested. That should not get them shot. That is not on the child. That is on the adults to hold cops responsible for violent, aggressive, and abusive behavior to people with disabilities.
Yeah,
Like,
and I think just also like our society's treatment of children, period.
heck yeah.
Just
Mhm.
childism, period.
Oh, yeah. Yes, 100%. So,
Yeah, because
that
when
was
you're
my
having a
take on it.
conversation when you're having a conversation with a kid and you're talking about their behavior, like that in of
Mhm,
itself is helpful. Like those
yeah,
conversations are helpful. And then when you have those regulated times, you can also
mhm,
talk about other ways to express yourself, or then you can teach into executive functioning skills or what have you. And you
mhm.
can't do that in the moment. That's why, like, when you see a teacher, how did it start when it was talking about this one, about handling indignation? It's something like you hear all the time when a teacher calls someone into the hallway. Um, it's I'm missing it now, but it's basically like, all right, what'd you do? Like you put the onus on the child, and
Oh,
that's
yeah.
ineffective. We don't do that here.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
want to kind of close with something that you were talking about that I
Mhm,
think brings us to a bit of a different point. And this is a quote from page 158. And it says, despite what many educators may think, we don't have to surrender the students' critiques to engage them. Other than a little time, we don't lose anything by considering the merits of their complaints. Which, and pause quote, which is what you're talking about by having these conversations with students. Back in
mhm,
the quote, sometimes all we need to do is show them how we have arrived at a situation or a decision and explain the various competing interests or concerns. Then we can ask them how they would decide things. If they demonstrate in their explanation that they are stuck in self centered or retributive models of thinking, it is a terrific opportunity to push them to consider other people or greater needs. By hearing that's not fair as a request for dialogue and deliberation, we can open up classroom interactions so that relationships can be strengthened and moral development can be enhanced. This can make education profoundly relevant, if not reverent. End
yeah,
quote.
yeah.
Yeah, because that's the power
I
of the
wa
conversation and
Uh-huh.
collaboration.
I just wanted to like hop on that and talk a little bit about like the adolescent cognitive development, right? Like if we're talking about cognitive development stages, when you get in between 11 and 13, you see hypothetical thinking and an extreme need to uh, have equitable systems and recognize inequity. 11 to 13, that's the time when adolescents start saying, wait, that's not fair, because they are able to consider all these different possibilities and the possibilities and what the possibilities would look like, right? If systems were equitable. So they are on one about fairness. And it says, he has a quote, um, and often knew the um, hmm, I'm just gonna there
Paraphrase
we
it
go.
for us.
Yeah. Um, the ethically critical contrarian who, so the claim that's not fair has a lot going on with it. But in some cases, students go public with their unfair critique to request dialogue. Okay, well, this wasn't the quote I was looking for, but I like it. So students will often say that's unfair. One, it's developmentally appropriate because their cognitive, their brains like, oh, like
I
we can
love
consider all
the
of these. The brain,
demonstration of cognitive. If you are watching the live
the
right now, or
moose.
if you're listening, Bill's got her hands up to her head, like her fingers moving, like cognitive.
This well, first up, this is how I kept my kids' attention.
I love
I'd be like,
it.
yeah, like doing all this crazy
It's like
stuff,
an
right? Like when
expressive
you,
dance whenever you instruct.
yeah. Um, so it's cognitively appropriate, developmentally appropriate for these kids to be like, that's not fair. And if you try to shut that down, you are shutting down a cognitive developmental milestone, which is another thing in that
Yeah.
post yesterday I hit on, was that American education systems are not designed according to cognitive developmental milestones, but that's like a podcast and an episode in itself.
Yeah, that's a different
Um,
episode right there.
yeah, but this quote that I'm about to read is how it could actually be a request for dialogue, which is also another that's another big thing we have to consider is attention seeking versus connection seeking, right? So the quote is on page 158. In some cases, students go public with their unfair critique to request dialogue and negotiation. They want to take part in designing something different, something more just. That's the kind of resistant impulse we want to encourage if we can, because perspective taking, moral development, and purpose all depend on regular experimentation and interaction. And students' concern with making things fair is a sign of developing ethical code, if not the emergence of empathy. Boom.
Yeah, I like
Mhm.
it. So
Yeah,
then,
let's
what
start.
would your action step for teachers be after hearing all this information?
um, recognize if conflict in the classroom dysregulates you, if it's a trigger,
Yeah.
and if it's a trigger, then do some inner work, do that inner work, do that uh, cognitive behavioral thinking, dialectic behavioral, or it's cognitive behavioral therapy. I think dialectic behavioral therapy, those they all have different ways to control thinking, recognizing, controlling, challenging thoughts, um, controlling your parasympathetic response. Um, Somatic experiencing is another great has great strategies to use for regulation. You cannot help a kid regulate if you're dysregulated yourself. So we really want to focus on that. And I know that you mentioned was it Let's Not Do That Again? Has the regulation section.
Yeah.
And I have the Meet the Needs workshop series, which is the first live workshop is January 22nd. That is all on regulation, co-regulation, sensory processing for teachers and emotional overwhelm. Um, I think we both had to hit those hard as teacher trainers and
Yeah.
coaches because the need is it's so needed out there. So,
It's a big one. So there's support.
mhm,
If you're looking for support
yes.
and you're ready for support, there's support. And this is one of those things where it's very hard to learn it on your own. You
Mm,
know, it's like when
mhm,
you're stuck in the trenches, it's hard to
yeah,
see the exit route.
yep.
Yeah. Or it's like a
Yeah,
corn maze, right? When you're in the corn maze, you
right.
need someone to help guide
Oh,
you out
yeah.
and tell you which direction to go in.
Yeah.
I got all the metaphors lately on the podcast. I hope you as listeners are
All the
appreciating
metaphors.
these fine metaphors. I
Yes.
think that my action step is kind of twofold. It's number one, there's power in conversation, and to
Mhm,
take advantage of those conversations and use them to advance the
mhm,
class and the culture and the students. And the number two, to view withdrawal or that shyness um, with the same, if not more, importance that you
mhm,
view the indignation with. Because all of our kids need us. The ones who are on the tables yelling F you, and the ones who are just in the corner drawing and refusing to partake.
mhm. Yeah, I love that.
All right. Good episode, Britt.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, hey, next week we will be back again at our 3:45-ish to talk about, let me find the chapter title. I'm not skipping class, you are. Socioeconomic reasons for resisting school. Oh, we're going to go off on this one, I already can tell.
Mm-hmm.
So, come live. It's going to be great. In the meantime, I'm Ashlyn.
I'm Brittany.
And we
And,
hope this podcast left you feeling remoralized.
and re-energized.
We do a different sign off each time. That's why we can't
Yeah.
be in sync. All right.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.